Hello, all you fabulous souls, and welcome to this week's episode of the Queer Quest podcast. I'm your host, Christiana Green, the CEO and founder of Queer Quest and a transformation coach for people in the queer community. This week on the podcast, we've got a very special guest in the house coming up for you. We've got Erica Vogel, who is a queer trans woman, who is a public speaker, who is an advocate, and is also an author of a brand new book called Advice from Your Trans Aunty. So what are we covering in the episode today? We're going to be talking about the process that happens before, during, and after your transition and sharing some advice that is key and pivotal to help you along that journey as well. We talk about Erica's journey before and during that process as well, so you get an understanding of her experience as well. And we also talk about the state of political affairs, especially in the US, that relates to the recent election and how that can affect people in the trans community and the queer community moving forward. So if you are keen, let's jump into the episode. But before then, if you do enjoy this episode, if you learn something new, please consider following the show, subscribing to your favorite podcast platform, or leaving us a 5-star review. This helps the podcast more than I can say, and this allows us to reach more and more people. And that would mean the world to me. So buckle up and let's get into the episode today. Welcome to the Queer Quest podcast, your beacon of light and sprinkle of glitter in the queer community. I'm your host, Christiana Green, CEO and founder of Queer Quest and a transformation coach for queer individuals. And together, we are embarking on a journey of transformation. Each week, we bring you a new training topic or connecting with visionary queer leaders in healing and coaching, diving deep into conversations that inspire growth, celebrate diversity, and empower you to live authentically. So wherever you are, settle in and let's get ready to unlock the vibrant potential within. This is where your quest begins. Hello, all you fabulous souls, and welcome to another episode of the Queer Quest podcast. I'm your host, Christiana Green, the CEO and founder of Queer Quest and a transformation coach for people in the queer community. So today, I am not on my own today. We have a very special guest in the house. We have got Erica Vogel. Sorry, I was going to say Vogel, but I know it's Vogel because we spoke about it before, who is a queer trans woman, who is an author of Advice from Your Trans Aunty and a public speaker. Welcome to the Queer Quest podcast.
Thank you for having me, Christiana. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you and all of your audience.
Well, we're looking forward to having a deep conversation because we were just saying offline that there are no questions off limits. So we're going to go high, we're going to go low, we're going to go left, we're going to go right today.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's get into it.
Beautiful. Well, like I said that you're an author, and it's a book which is Advice from Your Trans Aunty. Let's start with that. Like, tell us a bit about what that book is all about and where it came from.
Sure. So this book comes from throughout my life as a person who has tackled a lot of things, even before I came out as trans, but tackling quite a few events in my life, from, surviving abuse, and alcoholic parents, going through a lot of job turmoil, learning issues, financial issues. Like, people come to me to ask for advice on how they should handle this problem, because I approach that with a lot of humanity and a lot of empathy. And I give people a sense of, like, here's what to think about, not so much what you should do, so that you can claim your agency in that moment, right? So that's kind of in my history. When I came out at work 3 years ago, I found myself suddenly fielding questions about and for trans people at work as a regular part of my job, even though that wasn't really my job, right? And
was in a big company, right?
Yeah. 50,000 employees.
Wow.
I was at Capital One. I was quite recognizable on their main campus because there's not that many 5'11", blonde, curly-haired trans women on campus, right? So people would come to me for advice about, how do I have a non-binary team member on my team? How do I work with them? Or like, I think I might want to come out. What do I need to do? Or like, I have a child who's trans, things like that. I also came up in the LGBTQ community because my father is gay. He fortunately, managed to survive the AIDS crisis of the 80s and 90s and is, happily living out his life today with his husband. So I grew up in the house with drag queens. So I've always had this sort of special place in the community, even before I knew my own sexuality and gender.
Yeah.
So this book comes out of being asked question after question after question and having the opportunity to give people a thoughtful response enough times that I felt like, oh, okay, this is a really good answer to this question. So this book is, I think, 47 questions that I get from everything through how do I know that I'm trans to how do I come out at work? What might you need to consider to how do I increase my advocacy? How do I help other people grow in advocacy? So it's really more questions that happen in the process of being a trans person than the nuts and bolts of transition, right? While there's a little bit of medical discourse and social discourse and legal discourse, if you go those routes, it's really the things that come up for us and what we're thinking and how we consider them and how we plot a path forward, more than it is like top surgery or bottom surgery or hormone replacement therapy. Those are like 1% of the book. So it really is a book, literally, it's really an advice column written in a book format based on the 47 or so questions I've been asked repeatedly throughout the last 3 years.
Okay, I see. So it sounds like from like when you're in that company that a lot of people would come to you for advice. So in a big company of 50,000 people, was the majority of the response to you coming out like positive, or like was it like very off? Because it sounds quite positive from saying, but I'm sure that's not the whole story, right?
Mostly positive. So we'll start with mostly positive. There were some local things that weren't so positive, but by and large, I remember the day that I came out at work. I had met with the human resources representative. I met with my boss. I met with the VP of my division so that they were all prepared for this. We had planned this coming out over 6 weeks, right? Because I was in a fairly prominent role. The work I was doing was visible to 2/3 of the company, right? And so we wanted to handle this right. So I wrote a letter that got emailed out 9 a.m. Thursday on a Thursday, right? And I hit send on that, and it just basically was like, oh boy, here we go. Now it's real. By this point, I was out to most of my social circle. Like this was just like one of the final steps at first. To come out, to come out to like 300 close team members.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a lot. And the emails just flooded in. I could not get any work done all day because it was just email after email after email of people being so supportive and so kind. It was really heartwarming. And I think what I was aware of at that time, that while it was so heartwarming for me, I know that's not necessarily common. Many trans people, right? Because I was in a position of power at the company. There were some, legal ramifications if they were awful at a company that's this big, publicly traded and all that. So I'm not saying that they treated me kindly because they had to, but it was the personality of the company, right? But I know that if you're with a much smaller firm, much smaller corporation, maybe a small business in your neighborhood, that might not be the case, right? So I had a lovely experience. Now, I did run into a few people over the preceding 2 years that I was there after that event that I knew that their dislike of me had nothing to do with my job performance or how I go about my day. It had to do with me. And it became obvious. And, we had to have some conversations with human resources about that. So, but by and large, incredibly positive for sure.
Okay, great. And so when it comes to the advice that you give in the book, do you believe that, in a lot of big companies that it can be easier for people? Because I could imagine for myself, and like I said, in my situation, I'd be thinking, oh my God, it'll be harder in a bigger company, but it could be like, what would your assessment be like? Is it like the difference between like a big company, smaller company? Like, I don't know, you got experience, but I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people as well, right? As an app.
Sure. I think the first thing we have to consider there, Cristiano, is that because this is an international conversation, I'm in the DC metro area of the United States. Of course, you are where you are, right? Um, so in general, in the United States, if you're with a big corporation, it's really not an issue from a corporate standpoint. That does not mean that your manager, your team members might not have problems, but generally you're going to get looked out for to at least a bare minimum degree, right? If it's a smaller company, there could be less desire to do that because, well, it's not a giant corporation that's held to regulations and various laws. So I think it really depends on where you are. Like, obviously, if you're in the UK right now, they're having quite a hard time. Trans people are having quite a hard time there. So you might be a little bit more risky coming in at work, right? But it maybe in Germany or France, it's not a problem at all. So I think it depends on where you live. If the country generally has at least a neutral positive, I think you're probably good. But I would definitely tell people to have the conversations, bring your human resources person in and have conversations with leadership before you come out. Because what I ensured they did is that as soon as I sent that email out that I told you, they immediately responded. They had their responses ready to go, welcoming me to Capital One as my full self, right? So they set the tone for the behavior they expected.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, and that makes sense. And that's great. Cause some of the questions, I'm assuming some of the questions in the book might relate to like the fact that like, how many people would actually think to go to HR before they go and do this? Is it a process for people to go to do that, or that, cause it's such an internalized experience and it's a big struggle. Of course, you said you're already out to, the social circle at work, etc. But to go and do that, you being in a leadership position, is probably at the forefront of yourself because of a lot of systems. But I can imagine a lot of people who might have just been somewhere in the middle of the company, like not necessarily a higher position. They're like, how important is it for people? Like, I want like for them to actually get on board with the company so that it does become a smoother thing for them.
I would say that if you are planning on being out as trans in your company or a company you're about to go to work for, it's essential that you talk to human resources, you talk to HR, right? If you're a trans person that can pass as cis, it's up to you whether you want to say something or not. Me, I'm visibly trans. Like, I don't pass as a woman. I don't pass as a man. I pass as someone you think is trans. I look trans, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's incumbent upon us to go to those systems inside our companies that are supposed to look out for the company and the employees to make sure things get handled well. That is not a guarantee that they will be handled well. I suspect this is probably true for you as well, but we also have to remember that HR is employed by the company that they work for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
They're there to protect the company, and they weigh the risk of, is protecting me, a trans person, in the good interests of the company? Now, the company that I work for, it is. And hopefully in this day and age, that's easy for you to discover and look up. Hopefully, if you're at a larger company, you know some other trans and non-binary people and can ask their experiences before you come out. Hopefully there's some sort of national index of, LGBTQI equality that you can take a look at. Like, do research first, know what you're in for, ask people who have been there to know, so that you have an idea of what's coming your way. But always, I think, involve HR.
Yeah. And I think that's a smart decision, especially like I said, at a big company, because they can hopefully support you in the best way possible, even though, as you said, it's always at the expense of the company. But hopefully that means that you are also at the forefront of those things as well,
Yes. Yes. And in my situation, I was the second highest ranking trans person at this company. And the gal that was a position above me, I had the benefit of her having come out just a year before me. See, so we got our heads together and sort of talked about it. And she's like, here, learn from what I did. So that really helped. Like, I can't stress enough. If there is another trans person, go talk to them.
Let them know, because again, no matter what, they're gonna be able to keep your secret. I guess they're gonna I feel like you could trust them because they know the experience. They're not going to, 99% of people, right? And you'd say are going to be good.
Yeah, and I would extend that to the queer community within your work, right? Generally, the queer community is very, very pro on trans people. They see us as part of the community. So even if you don't know another trans person, the queer community at your workplace might.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'd love to maybe take a step back now, because I know you said you grew up in a queer household. Your dad was your father. Talk to me about your journey then of getting to the place where you are now. How was it, like younger years to then discovering who you truly are?
So I've known that I was trans since I was like 5. Now, we didn't have language for that. I'm a 50-year-old gal. We didn't have language for that back in the 70s, right? And even in the 80s and 90s, we were just kind of coming around to language for that. So I always knew that something wasn't quite right, because while I thought I was one of the girls, no one else thought that, right? And so I was taught through, bullying and ridicule and shame that that's not a cool thing to say at this day and age. So you got to act like a boy, right? So while I was dealing with all of that, I was also, when my parents divorced, my dad came out of the closet, I was 3, right? So I don't have a memory of my dad not living as his authentic self. So, right? My brother does, who's 4 years older, but I don't. And so, growing up with him in my life, and seeing him have long-term partners, spending the weekend with his friends that would come over, drag queens or whatever. I grew up in a gay household unequivocally. And so it helped me understand that I was at least bi, right? I identify with queer as a term for me, in terms of sexuality, but I didn't have any baggage around that because I had a model in the house that I lived, right? And then of course my mom, she married another guy. So I had sort of the cis heteronormative lifestyle and the cis gay lifestyle. So, and I grew up in Atlanta, another big city in the US, quite sort of liberal and open, and actually in the gay center of that city. Right. And, to me, there was never any question that it would be okay to be out as myself, but gender was a harder thing to reconcile because we just didn't have good language. We didn't have, good representation whatsoever. So, growing up, going to school, going to high school, going to college, I knew who I was from that part, right? And so I think it does make it easier for me to transition it eventually. I think what slowed me down in my lifetime was that I have a real need for safety and security because of the tumultuous childhood I had. And so every time that I got to, that having safety and security, I would ask myself the question, is it worth it to do this? What would I give up? What would I lose? And usually I would talk myself back into the closet. Right.
Yeah.
But eventually I hit this point where it was I can't go on. I know that, self-harm is in my future if I don't make a choice. I pursued, I know you talk about transformation. I pursued transformation, mental, emotional, spiritual transformation my whole life, meditation, yoga, going to church, Buddhism, all the things, all the new age practices. And it was still always there. Now, most of the time I was able to put it away and ignore it because I found something else to work on, right? That needed to be worked on.
And literally got the high achieving person, so you can jump all into that one thing. I can imagine that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I've got to, I got to solve this financial problem. My career is stalled out again. I've got to pivot in my career. I've got to get my savings and retirement to a certain point. I've got to, always something I need to do that could suppress that. But eventually I got to the point where most of those problems have been solved for a while. And yet I was still trans. Nothing solved being trans. Right.
So that's no amount of meditation that was gonna get you to not be the odd.
There's not.
Yeah.
There is a cure for being trans, and that is to transition. That is the medically accepted cure. Right. So, the time came where I knew that it was go forward or don't go forward. Right. And, that involved a lot of conversations with me and my wife, and sorting through that. But we made the right choice. Right. I made the right choice for me. We made the right choice for our family because I've accelerated again. Right. I don't feel bound to this shameful inner thing. It's a part of who I am. And I've thrived as a result of it. And I lost none of that safety. I lost none of that security. Now, granted, I live in a big liberal city in the United States, one of the gayest. I actually just read a fact. Washington, D.C. has 4 times the amount of trans people as any other city in the United States, right? So I wound up living in the right place, have a good, strong community. And these are all like signs that someone's going to thrive. And so life has worked out for me and I'm back on track because now there's nothing that's holding me back anymore. So I guess that's sort of a long-winded answer to your question.
No, that's okay. And so you touched on a lot of points, and I think the main point was that you can try to go on your journey of spirituality or do all these things to try to fix it or to avoid it or to numb it or to push it down. But the truth of who you are is always going to be there. Whether you at some point in your life accept it, which we know that many do go throughout their whole lives denying those things. And it can have, such deep effects on, your psyche, your safety, your security. And I'm sure as of now, you've probably never felt maybe safer than being able to be in your own shoes as metaphysically, right?
Yeah. Right. I would like for my country to be safer. Yeah, for us. We tend to be the people that lead that, and that's not happening right now. But yes, I feel quite safe. But again, I'm very privileged in where I live. I'm privileged in, I have to acknowledge my privilege, right? As a white trans lady who's got a good education, who has means, who lives in a liberal city, like I am under the least amount of threat of the people in the United States, right? And I always try to acknowledge that, right? There are people that if you're Black and trans or Black queer and trans, like you are really in danger, right? So, but yes, I feel very safe and secure. And I hope that people living in the more dangerous areas of the United States are able to get themselves somewhere safer in the next 4 years.
And that's sometimes the decision that people have to make when it comes to making the transition. Is it smart for me to do this for my safety and security? Or like is living this way or figuring out, can I get out of this situation so that I can be my authentic self? So what would you say are some of the things trans people go through that are across, like, which we're talking about the right? Because you have a very much awareness of that, but like and I'm sure it's similar in other countries or could be worse or better. But what are some of the struggles that you would say that somebody would have in less fortunate than where you live?
I think that probably the biggest one is acceptance, right? We know that trans people have much better outcomes when they are accepted and affirmed and loved by their families or whatever their circle is, right? And it's amazing when that can be your parents and your siblings. That's not always true for people.
No.
Right? So I would tell people, go find your chosen family. If that's not, go find your chosen family anyways. I'm sure you know how amazing chosen family is, right?
Yes.
But get outside your family group. If they cannot affirm you, you need to, I'm not saying you need to disconnect from them, but you need to find a place to get that, right? You need to have that acceptance. So that's probably number one. Then number two, there is, depending on where you live, the access to medical care, if that's the route that you go, right? That can be quite different all over the place. Heck, even inside the United States, it's different based on the state that you live in, right? What you can and can't do. So I think understanding what you can get done where you live is the next most important thing to sort out and plot a realistic path, right? Not everybody can change where they live from one town or one city to another. Most people can't move from one country to another. That's just not how our world works very well. So, it's, I think what I talk to people about a lot lately is assess where you are and if it will support who you really are. And if not, where can you get to where that can happen? Right. Until we get past this point in time and we accept that trans people are real and valid in their expression, like, yes, you're going to have to think in terms of your own safety.
And that's important. Again, yeah, like realizing, like I said, like, do you have a support network around you within your family? If not, go find your chosen family, because those people have likely walked the path that you're on and can give you some solace, some love, and some great advice as well. Or like they can relate to you because maybe they're going through something that's similarly, like marginalized, right? So you can find people that
they don't. It's great if you can find another trans person. They don't have to be. I know that if you and I lived in the same area, I could come to you and feel affirmed with you, right?
Yeah.
I know that Val down the street, who one of our best friends down the street, went through breast cancer a year ago, and she was there for me when I did my transition. So I was really there for her. Like, people have different things that happen to them in their lives that truly might not look like what you've gone through, but when people have faced life, they might have something to offer you. But you need to, of course, you got to find out. You got to make sure that they affirm you, make sure that they accept you. But I think when you find your people, you got to hold on to those people tight. Because they're not always the people that you share blood with.
Are you ready to embark on a journey of transformation that's uniquely yours? Welcome to QueerQuest, the world's first and best personal development platform created by and for the queer community. Imagine a space where your authenticity isn't just accepted, it's celebrated. A place where you can grow, learn, and thrive alongside a vibrant community that understands you. At QueerQuest, we're more than just a platform. We're a family. Connect with like-minded individuals, share your stories, and empower each other to reach new heights. Our tailored courses are designed to address the unique experiences of the queer community, from self-love and confidence building to career advancement and beyond. We've got you covered. It's time to step into your power and transform your journey. Join us today at courses.queerquest.vip, see what we're all about, and sign up to begin your quest. And more often than not, they usually aren't for a lot of people in this community. And there's a varying degree of that, because there's, of course, acceptance, but sometimes people, only go so far to accept you, but necessarily don't know the path that you've walked, and maybe don't want to, because maybe for them it might feel whatever feelings that it might feel about that. Maybe it feels like, oh, I've put you in that situation, and it causes me pain to hear about it, whatever it is, right? And that's totally okay, but just know your people, as you said there as well. Know the places that are going to be right for you. Of course, every person's transition is quite different, right? There is varying degrees of what people can do to transition. For the general person out there who probably doesn't understand it, I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit about the different kinds of transitions that people are going to go through. Is the spectrum, right? And not everyone falls left to right. There's a lot of people that are somewhere in the middle, right? That's the majority of people.
Yeah. I love this question because I think it's nuance that people don't really understand, right? When we think about trans people, the image that comes to most people's mind is someone that looks like me, a blonde trans woman, right? A white trans woman. And we think that is the length and breadth of transness, right? So I think we need to acknowledge that there are trans men, people that were assigned female at birth, that transition to masculine. There are non-binary people, and there's a whole spectrum. Like, there's a spectrum of gender that's not cis. And so if we start with that premise, then we can begin to accept that there's not one way to transition correctly. I think the question that I get so often that I shouldn't be surprised by, but people have this expectation that as soon as you come out, you're going to go have bottom surgery. You're going to go have gender reassignment surgery. That is not how that works at all. It's going to take a couple of years, and that's depending on where you live, if it's even accessible. Frankly, most trans women and trans men don't have that surgery, either because it's not available or they can't afford it, or they don't want it.
There's a varying degree of transition, as you say. That's not always important for them, right?
Right. And so when we talk about that point, we also have to let people know, hey, it's rude to ask what's in my pants, right? Don't do that. It's none of your business. If we're not getting to bed together, it's not your business. But then I think there are 3 types of transition people need to be aware of. There's medical transition, which is what we all think being trans is. So you're changing the hormones that you run on, some type of bottom surgery and top surgery, whether you have a breast augmentation or a mastectomy, things like that you might choose to do. And there's even options within those. There's quite a few different types of surgeries to have if you choose, right?
Yeah.
Then there's social transition, where that one typically tends to be, maybe you go by different pronouns. You change your name, you change your presentation, how you carry yourself in the world, separate from medical transition, right? Or they could be done in combination, right? And then this is the coming out. Social transition is sort of the coming out and people getting used to the quote unquote new you. It's really not a new you. It's the same you. They're just getting used to the real you, right? And then the other one is legal transition now. And this is totally dependent upon where you live and what country you live in, but like legally changing your name, legally changing your gender marker, updating all of your financial records, updating your passport. So those are sort of the 3 phases that we have, and people can use all of them or one of them. So I think the real message here is that trans people are a spectrum, just like so many other spectrums that are out there. And when you put expectations on trans people to be a certain way, you're actually erasing a wide swath of vital and valid people.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, like, as you said, that you could know someone in your life who actually already is trans, but they haven't shared that with you, or they haven't gone further down their path in their transition, because for them right there, that's enough, or they're taking baby steps, or as you said, they're following like what is safe until they can actually take the next step for themselves as well.
Yeah, here's an interesting fact for you. So the data on this is still emerging. We think that in any given population, trans people are 0.6 to 1.5% of the population. Now, the reason why there's such sort of a broad gap there is that has to do with people's feeling of safety with outing and identifying themselves, right? We believe that in the next 20 to 30 years, that number will increase as people feel more and more safe. But
Great.
In the United States, at roughly 1% of the population, there's 3 million of us or so, right? Worldwide, there may be as many as 83 million trans people. So, we're just under 1 in 100 people. So it's likely you have met someone that is trans, even if you don't know it.
Yeah, and that's very true. And the reason, you notice that every time they do some sort of like a census thing, right? Every time as the country or things progress, you notice that the statistics for things like the LGBT queer people, they go up because they feel more safe to say that. So it's not like those people weren't there before. It's just that they now feel more comfortable to say, yes, I'm not going to be discriminated or get in trouble for doing this because I'm able to legally, I've got legal things behind me that back me up that allow me to do that. The same thing with, have you ever seen trans?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying that's exactly the same thing as what I think you're saying as well for transgender. Like the amount of people right now that would feel comfortable to say it legally on a piece of paper or whatever, where you're going to get these statistics, is very different to like, I'm living else happily, but I just don't feel comfortable to write that down for whatever reason.
Or I'm just not comfortable telling anybody yet, but I know. Right? So there's that There's this really great chart out there called the chart of left-handedness. I don't know if you've ever seen this, right? And this may be a very American thing. I'm not sure how. Okay, I was a lefty forced to be a righty, or lefty forced to be a righty, because I'm of that. I was like the last generation that went through this, right? And so when we stopped forcing kids to be right-handed, there was this sudden and alarming rise in left-handedness that alarmed people. But then eventually, after I think like 10 years, it laid over, right? So that it was like this steep climb, and that really is representative of the LGBTQ plus community, because people are like, well, where are all these left-handed people coming from? What's happened to our society? Well, when you stop enforcing a norm that's frankly arbitrary, and you stop shaming people for it, then you'll actually find out what the distribution of that data is. And we're seeing that today. We're living that today with everybody in the community, as we're not having, the only way in which we're having more LGBTQ plus people in the world is in the fact that our population continues to increase, right? But the percentage is still climbing because people are still getting to the point of feeling comfortable saying who they are. That doesn't make us new. We've been around as long as humans have been around.
Yeah, definitely. And celebrated in different cultures across the world.
Absolutely.
Yes. We're not going anywhere, even if politically some people want to do that. And I know that you are, you're quite an advocate, especially like when it comes to, across corporations, but I also know that you've spoken a lot about what's happened, with the election and how that can affect people who are in the transgender community. So do you want to talk a little bit about like some of the things that you've been seeing, understanding, especially as people have voted someone in charge that can affect our community?
It was I'll say this, it was a shock to those of us not on that side of the fence.
Yes.
Right. But it is what has happened. Here we are. And we don't really have much choice but to get on with affairs at the end of the day. So what does that mean for all of us? Well, there is certainly a lot of doom and gloom out there about what it could mean for us. Like, laws at the national level instead of the state level. So I don't know how much you know about the states, but federally, there are some laws that the states are obliged to follow, and then there are state laws that supersede or aren't impacted by the Fed. So mostly today, transgender acceptance, let's put it that way, is legislated at the state level, right? And because we have not made it a national mandate, right? And then codified that into our various laws and the Constitution, right? So that's the risk of Trump ascending to the presidency again. Now, curious to see what you thought of the first time around, but as someone who lived through it, it was quite chaotic and very ineffective. I think only 20% of what he said he would do actually got done. What happened quite often is he would sort of toss something out there, the nation would rebel against it, and he would back away. He is a guy that is just bluster. That's just a lot of talk and not much else. Does that mean we shouldn't be worried? No, we should be worried because there are certain people behind him who definitely want to sort of take us back to a Christo-fascist point of view. However, because he has favorites and he plays his favorites against each other and they're all trying to one-up each other, we're going to be in for a whole lot more of the same as last time. Now, we'll definitely see some erosions in the rights that we do have as trans people. And I think we're going to see this for queer people as well. Like we could lose the right to marriage, right?
Exactly.
Will it become worse? It's hard to say. I think that the liberal areas of the country, especially when those are liberal states like California, New York, right, where they are sanctuary states, right? We know that they're going to be safe havens for trans people where there's nothing the federal government can really do about that. My worry is about the draconian laws spreading from 2 to 3 states to a swath of states in the United States. Right, how that affects people and sort of pushes us to the margin, because you cannot legislate us away. Like you can try, but we're still going to be here in a year or 10 years or 20 years, right? So I think the call of the day is plan for your safety, have an exit plan to at least somewhere safer if you can. Use mutual aid to help you have, meet ends if you need to. But I think honestly, it's stand up and use your voice, right? This is a country where when a majority in the nation speak, the politicians have to listen. That's how it works here. What we're struggling with is getting people out of that things are terrible. There is nothing we can do. I need to run and hide. Stay. We need to get them to be active, to join us in activism, to get out there in the streets, be loud, show up to protests, call your political leaders, annoy them, live your life loudly is what needs to happen. That's how we won those rights in the past. And if we assume that won't work this time, we're giving up our greatest strength. What they need for us to do is to run away in fear. If we don't do that, they don't really have the appetite to bring something else about because they barely won this election. The election was, I think, 6 weeks ago, and the margin is the second smallest ever. So it's not that the majority of America voted for this. It's that 1 million more people voted for it than didn't. And also 100 million people did not vote.
And is that high in comparison to other years, or and why do you think that is? So many, like almost a third of the country, whatever the percentage is.
So we don't have mandatory voting here. I don't know if you do.
I knew that in his own voting, I knew that was that, but I also, curious to understand why so many people choose not to vote. Pivotal thing.
So generally the way our cycles of elections work is that there's an active core of people, maybe 100 million people that vote in every election. So we have an election every 2 years of some kind, just based on how our system works. And the president comes up every 4, right? When in the last election, President Biden versus Trump, we had the most votes of all time. I think 167 million votes cast. And there's roughly 230 million people at large eligible to vote.
Eligible to vote, yeah.
Right. Because you have to be 18 and not have committed a crime that would remove your right to vote, like a federal crime.
And also be able to put my system, because there's a lot of people who live in the country that are from, say, other parts of the world that are...
You have to be a citizen. Yeah, you cannot vote if you're not a citizen, right? So generally we see at least a quarter of those eligible to vote not voting, right? Just because apathy, they just don't pay attention to politics. They don't think it's important. They don't see how it's going to impact their world. They're just people like that. If you give them a choice about voting, some people are going to choose not to vote. What happened this time is that I think people believed that there was no way he would win again and didn't show up to vote like they did last time. We were coming out of COVID where Trump handled it so badly, right? And so they voted for a change. And one of the things that's been interesting to watch this election cycle this year is every country where inflation has continued to be a problem, they have voted in new leadership.
Yeah, gone the other side.
And that's what we're having, right? So we've had people...
And the issue in America was around the rising cost of everything.
Cost living.
Yeah.
Right. And there's always a core group of people that are going to vote for either side, no matter what. It's the people in the middle that actually decide the president more often than not. And usually it comes down to something like my healthcare, my bills, the cost of food, the job market. It comes down to like a single issue.
Yeah.
And
immigration.
This time it came.
Yeah.
Right. So when you listen to people in the country, like the economy, right? Okay. Yes, sure. Also apathy, right? But I think we have to acknowledge the fact that a woman of color is not who America is going to elect as president, right? Which that's what Kamala Harris represents. She was the right president for the time, but we have not progressed that far as a country.
Yeah.
Right. So sexism and misogyny racism and misogyny were at play. So I think what we're in for is more of what we had in the past, and it can be quite dangerous, but we don't really know how bad it's going to be. And it may just be messy more than anything. My worry is that we don't take action to change our political system to one that's more beneficial, right? It's a system where those that have the money pay for the political leanings of the country, right? We're truly an oligarchy at this point instead of a democracy. And I don't know how we solve that problem. So, but if you've been paying attention to American media, you'll have seen recently that the CEO of one of the largest healthcare networks here was assassinated, and people in this country are divided very much around how much they loved that fact or how much they hated that fact. And generally, people have lied on the other side. But I saw a poll, like 40% of people under 30 saw that as a positive thing. That's telling you the rise of some kind of resistance that is coming to America, for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
We're in for political unrest.
Yeah. And so then for people in the queer community, what, like, again, I know we've mentioned this before, but what do you suggest that people do when it would, like, in that situation? Like, what can they do to advocate or do
I think
help them?
and this idea is probably universally useful, right? Build community. I think anytime we're talking about being a marginalized community, and let's be honest, if you're a marginalized community in your nation, there are issues to be resolved, right? Like you're not in favor, right? And so by community building your network of people, not just on your phone or your computer, but in your neighborhood, in your town, in your city, your village, whatever that happens to be, and working together to, be that chosen family we talked about, provide mutual aid to each other, make sure that you're surviving, that you're thriving in small groups, and then starting to connect those groups into coalitions, right? Because one of the greatest powers of the majority is they're quite skilled at turning the minority groups against each other, to fighting for the scraps. If we stop fighting for the scraps and we worked as a coalition, it'd be a lot harder to deny us. So that's one of the things that I'll be working on, is building my community locally, connecting it to other communities, right? The Black and Brown Indigenous community, the queer community, the trans community, the community of women, and building coalitions so that we have strength in numbers, as opposed to just me fighting for trans people. There's 3 million of us. How are we're not going to win that. You can never win that on our own.
Yeah.
In a country of 300 million.
Yes.
So collect together.
Yeah.
Collect together, support each other, make connections, build those communities for survival.
How do people go about doing that or finding that? If there's stuff that's already out there in their local area that they could be like be a part of.
That's a little bit harder to do, right? Especially for me to answer sort of at an international level. But I can say that we would, right? There's social media. It's a powerful tool, right? Finding people that you can start to build something with. Like I found hundreds of people online that I can tell after interactions that, like we have similar, thought processes in the way we want to work. And then pulling those people out of social media into communities, maybe using something like Discord or Signal or something like that, where you can have, one-to-one conversations, is the place to start that. If you happen to be in an area that's quite well populated with the queer community, then it starts with reaching out to your friends, reaching out to your local queer community group, right? And getting involved with them and building this and bringing your partners and peers into it so that you're all connected together. I mean, I think that's ultimately what we're talking about, is where possible, commune together in person, right? That's not always possible. But one of the best places to do that is look for those queer communities wherever you live and start to build them. And then, like I said, what's the one in the next town over, the next city over, right? and then using social media as a way to keep people connected. And use, I would definitely tell people, if you live in an area that is less friendly than the United States is, right, which has typically been pretty friendly, some of those conversations need to happen offline, right, for your own safety. You can't be out there on threads talking about how you're going to overthrow the government, right?
Yeah. Yeah, true. Find the people you can trust to talk to and figure out a way forward. And again, using social media to maybe find them and then taking it offline so that you can maybe meet up or speak to people.
Yeah.
These issues and see where
And
everyone's aligned. Because across the country, I can imagine, as you said, the as a trans person where you are, the things that are most important to you might be very different to, again, someone in a completely different area as well, which is why
absolutely
important that you said that you're creating a national kind of
right. So for the United States,
on like I'm trying to think of the name that you're trying to you mentioned earlier. You want to create like a directory of where people can go to figure things, right? That's what I'm trying to talk.
So one of the things that I've been working on is, as you know, the queer community is really good at passing on information from one person to the next, right? That's one of our greatest assets, right? The trans community is very much the same, right? Also, it's well documented. If you want to go and look up like hormone replacement therapy for estrogen, you can find all of that online. You don't need me to tell you. I can answer a question if you have a question. But what we don't have readily available is like, what are the lawyers in my state that I can trust, right? What are the mutual aid organizations in my state that I can go to? If I want to move from Florida to California, who can I reach out to in California to help me get there and help me find a place to land? So I'm with a group of other people working on a national registry of these things. They're out there. They're just very scattered. They're not in one easy place to find. So it's a place that we've begun to invite trans people and the parents of trans people of trans kids to figure out, is the state that they live in safe for them? And if not, where can they get to that's safe, right? So it's going to have everything from lawyers that you might need to queer communities, to even who are the political leaders and what are the laws in play for that state, so you know what you're up for. And hopefully I hope to get it to a point where we have sort of an expert for each state that can help people. Like when someone says, hey, I'm going to move to California, they be like, oh, where you want to go? You want to go to LA? Let me connect you to this person, and this person.
Beautiful.
Right. So the idea is to create a resource for people to have the ability to find some safety, even if it's just local to where they are.
Make decisions as to what's right for them and their future, and their future transition, wherever they are on that journey as well.
Right, and it's sort of a classic piece of community activism, which is a big part of democratic politics, right? Like you have to enable communities to thrive and survive, and so this is sort of my piece of that.
I love that. Well, Erica, I want to thank you for coming on here today and sharing all of your wisdom, your story, your journey. Where can people find Erica or talk more about that book, etc.? Because it sounds like it's going to be something super helpful for so many people out there.
Yeah, it's you can find me at my website, Erica Vogel. It's really easy. You'll probably put it in the seeing my custom. Yeah. Just go there. It has all my links to social media. You can buy the book there, but you can also get the book anywhere you buy books, right? So Amazon, whatever other outlet that you might have where you are, right? This book is really not just for trans people, and it's not US centric. It's not written from the US point of view, other than I am a resident of the United States, because we're not really talking about the medical practices or the legal practices, other than sort of like, here's what you can consider. Because it's sort of life in the process, it's good for allies, friends, family, your coworkers, anybody who wants to learn more about what trans people go through. It's a great resource for that.
And that's Erica Vogel, advice from your
.com.
Yeah, and it's advice from your trans auntie, right?
That's right. I'm your trans auntie.
Beautiful. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on here, Erica. It's been a wonderful conversation for me. I trust that everyone out there listening, it's a wonderful conversation for you. if you've got any questions, you want to share anything, you know how to reach out to me as well. And as Erica just shared, you can reach out to her on ericavogel.com. So I'll leave a link in the description below.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And you can get me on every other platform from there. So you just go to that one place.
Go to that one place and you can connect everywhere to Erica as well.
Yes.
Beautiful. All right, well, everyone.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely our pleasure to have you at the Queer Quest podcast. And maybe we'll have you back again in the future for another beautiful conversation.
I would love that. I love having this chat with you.
Beautiful. Alrighty, and for everyone else out there, always remember that you've got this and I've got you. Bye for now.